Imagine a world so harsh, so unforgiving, that even the wind becomes a merciless enemy, carving its icy wrath through the heart of the Colorado mountains. It was late December 1881, and the blizzard raged with a ferocity that could shatter the strongest of spirits. Snow danced in violent spirals across the jagged ridge, obscuring the world in a veil of white fury. Nathaniel Briggs stood resolute on the weathered porch of his isolated cabin, his broad shoulders hunched beneath a threadbare wool coat, his piercing gaze battling the storm's relentless assault. For 3 long winters, he had embraced the solitude of this rugged wilderness. The stillness was his sanctuary. No prying eyes, no intrusive voices to disturb his peace. Just a week prior, a letter had arrived, encased in oilskin, its ink faint yet decipherable. A domestic companion, it promised, arranged as per his request, would soon join him. She was to brave the perilous journey within the month, weather be damned, to handle cooking, cleaning, and the grueling demands of a homestead. Payment had been settled up front, with no possibility of return once she arrived. Nathaniel sought neither beauty nor warmth in her presence, only competence, silence, and the resilience to endure a Colorado winter. Yet, what he never could have foreseen was her arrival in the heart of a blinding tempest, and under such extraordinary circumstances. Through the swirling snow, he glimpsed her, a lone figure trudging up the ridge, a canvas satchel slung over her shoulder, a precious bundle cradled against her chest. As she neared, Nathaniel's brow creased in disbelief. Her swollen belly was impossible to ignore. She ascended the porch with deliberate, laborious steps, her breath forming fragile clouds in the frigid air. Snow dusted her cloak and boots, yet her dark, enigmatic eyes locked onto his with unshakable resolve. "If you're after a refund, you'll wait until spring," she declared, her voice firm despite the quiver in her hands. "I'm not turning back through that storm." Nathaniel's jaw clenched. He studied her rounded form, then met her gaze. "I didn't pay for a child," he stated, his tone measured, betraying none of the storm brewing within him. Could this unexpected burden possibly transform into something more? As the conversation hung heavy between them, her words lingered in the air. "He's coming, no matter what," she said, her voice steady, despite the biting wind that wailed around them, a mournful cry of the wilderness. She stood unyielding, her gaze fixed even as the gusts tugged at her cloak. Nathaniel remained silent for an endless stretch, his thoughts a storm of their own. Then, without a sound, he reached out, his rough hands brushing her shoulder with an unexpected tenderness as he lifted the worn satchel from her frame. Stepping back into the cabin's dim shelter, he left the door ajar. She wavered for a heartbeat before trailing behind him. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of lingering smoke, the earthy richness of cedar, and the faint memory of a meat stew that had long since dwindled to nothing. Embers pulsed weakly in the hearth, casting a frail warmth. A modest bed crouched in one corner, while a sturdy pine table held court in another, flanked by shelves burdened with dusty jars, idle tools, and books that hadn't felt a touch in years. Nathaniel set her satchel near the fireplace, then, avoiding her eyes, tossed a fresh log into the stove. Flames stirred lazily to life, their golden dance illuminating the rugged, time-worn walls. "Supper's in 2 hours," he grunted, his tone gruff yet not unkind. "Rest until then." Amine offered no gratitude, only a slight nod as she peeled off her snow-encrusted cloak with aching, deliberate movements. She edged toward the fire's embrace, one hand outstretched to its warmth, the other cradling the gentle swell of her belly. Nathaniel's gaze lingered. Her face was gaunt, sharper than he'd imagined, her eyes hollowed by burdens, her lips a tight seam forged by silence rather than joy. Could hardship carve so deeply into someone so young? He brushed past her, snatching a folded blanket from a chair and flinging it toward the cot across the room. "The bed's yours," he muttered, barely audible. She inclined her head once more, easing herself onto the cot with a faint wince of pain. Nathaniel strode to the pantry, his boots heavy on the floor, and peered into the stew pot. Wordlessly, he spooned a portion into a smaller vessel to warm, stoking the flame beneath it with practiced hands. Outside, the wind howled like a restless spirit clawing through the forest. Within, 2 weary souls shared the quiet of a snow-draped night, bound by no promises of kindness, yet perhaps too worn to turn away from this fragile truce. As the bitter January days crawled by, a relentless winter gripped the cabin. Snow draped the eaves like a heavy shroud, an unyielding second roof, while the wind wailed ceaselessly, a mournful song through the barren trees. Inside, Anna toiled with a quiet resolve that bordered on sacred. She swept the worn wooden floors, diced vegetables for hearty stews, and boiled linens in the dim back room with a rhythm that spoke of endurance. Her movements were deliberate, cautious yet steady, even as the weight of her growing belly pressed against her frame. Never once did she utter a plea for aid, nor did she speak of the persistent aches in her back or the stubborn cold that seeped into her bones. From the porch, over the steam of his morning coffee, or through the splintered gaps in the barn door, Nathaniel observed her in stolen, silent moments. Her face bore no trace of a smile, yet her hands danced with a grace that hinted at brighter yesterdays. He had offered her the small back room, a modest haven of warmth, and she kept it pristine, devoid of personal echoes. No photographs adorned the walls, no trinkets whispered of her past, only a humble bundle of clothes and a tattered Bible, its pages untouched by her voice, rested there. Their exchanges were sparse, clipped. At supper she might murmur, "Potatoes or cornbread?" And he'd grumble, "Either." Or he'd remark, "Chickens aren't laying much." And she'd nod, rising without a word. It was a fragile truce, a cold kind of peace. But one night, amid the stillness broken only by the shifting logs in the stove and the groan of ancient rafters, Nathaniel froze, axe poised mid-swing by the hearth. A sound faint as a whisper pierced the quiet, a stifled sob from behind her door. Was it pain? Regret? A memory too heavy to bear? It came again, a single shattered cry, as if torn free against her will. He didn't knock. Instead, he tread softly to the hallway, fed the wood stove with 2 more logs just outside her room, and set a tin cup of warm water on the floor. Then, retreating to his chair, he sat motionless until dawn's first light crept through the frost-laced windows. As dawn broke, the fire roared with unyielding vigor, casting a warm glow across the room. Near Anna's bed, the cup rested, drained of its contents, a silent witness to the night. Yet it was the sight of her shawl that stole her breath. A heavy woolen cloak, once marred by the grime of endless roads and the splatter of cooking fat, now washed pristine and folded with care at the foot of her bed. A quiet wonder stirred in her chest as she slipped out of her room and into the kitchen, where Nathaniel already knelt by the hearth, coaxing the flames. She lingered in the doorway, arms folded, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to show such kindness." He didn't turn to meet her gaze, letting a heavy silence hang before replying, "I'm not kind, just decent. There's a world of difference." Her face remained a mask, unreadable, but she gave a single nod before turning to the stove to prepare breakfast, her movements deliberate. That evening, as she retreated to her room, another surprise awaited. A weathered leather-bound book, its spine worn but pages untouched by time, lay on her bed. An old medical manual, tucked within a torn scrap of paper, marked a chapter on birth preparation, detailing positions, risks, and midwife alternatives. Anna stood motionless, clutching the book to her heart. Why this gesture? What unspoken understanding lay behind it? She didn't seek him out, didn't voice her gratitude, but when she served him stew that night, her hands placed the bowl with a tenderness new to her. For the first time, she sat opposite him. No words passed between them, only the shared rhythm of their meal, while the wind howled against the windows. In that stillness, something imperceptible began to thaw, like frost yielding to the first breath of spring. Outside, the snow softened, melting in reluctant inches. Mud clung to the front steps, and each morning, Anna wiped it clean before the fire took hold. She never uttered a complaint. Nathaniel observed how her hands grew steadier, her gait more assured, even as her belly swelled with life. Meals remained quiet, yet sometimes her eyes held a flicker of something unspoken. As the conversation from the previous evening still hung in the air like a fragile thread, their eyes met across the worn wooden table, holding a gaze that refused to falter. One stormy night, with the wind howling and shaking the fragile window panes, she stayed by the stove long after the supper dishes were cleared, her presence a quiet anchor in the dim light. Nathaniel sat near the hearth, his hands busy with a piece of kindling, carving it with deliberate, measured strokes, the rhythm almost meditative. She settled opposite him, her hands resting gently in her lap, fingers intertwined as if bracing for the weight of her words. "My husband perished in a labor camp," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, yet piercing the stillness. Nathaniel's hand froze, the knife hovering in midair. He didn't meet her eyes, not yet, but his silence urged her to continue. It wasn't the war that took him. She pressed on, each word heavy with buried pain. They accused him of stealing a sack of flour, a lie we both knew. He'd only struck a guard to shield me from harm. Nathaniel laid the knife down, his movements slow, deliberate. One blow, she recounted, and they dragged him away under the cover of night. By morning, I learned they'd beaten him until his ribs shattered. Internal bleeding. They called it. Her voice quivered, yet held firm, a testament to her strength. They wouldn't even let me see him. All I got was his wedding band. Wrapped in a scrap of napkin, Nathaniel rose, his frame casting a shadow as he crossed to the shelf, fetching a tin cup and filling it with water. He offered it to her, and with a nod, she accepted, cradling it in both hands as if it were something sacred. I've never spoken of this to anyone, she confided, her voice a fragile thread. Yet it haunts me, even in this remote place. Silence settled between them, broken only by the crackling of pine logs in the fire. Returning to his seat, Nathaniel gazed into the dancing flames. Stories like that have sharp talons, he said, his tone low and resonant. They cling tight, but out here perhaps their grip loosens just a fraction. A faint, weary smile touched her lips, a flicker of gratitude amidst the ache. Days drifted by, and soon a traveling merchant rolled into town, his cart brimming with pots, ribbons, and tidbits of news. As Nathaniel haggled for sugar and coffee, he couldn't shake the feeling of the man's lingering stare, a silent question hanging in the air. What secrets did this stranger carry, and what did he see in them? Continuing from the quiet tension that lingered in the air, Nathaniel found himself drawn into the town's murmurs about Anna. The widow from Kansas, he inquired with a furrowed brow, speaking to one of the locals under the dim light of a lantern. The same woman whose husband met a brutal end in the camp. They said she had disappeared into the wind. Yet, by the time the next market day rolled around, gossip trailed them like a persistent shadow, curling through the streets with every step they took. Nathaniel refused to cower under the weight of those whispers. As he strode into the saloon, his shoulders were set with defiance, his hat tipped back to reveal the steel in his eyes. "She works for me," he declared, his voice booming like the ominous rumble of an approaching tempest. "She's under my protection. If you've got a problem, you bring it to me." Silence fell heavy in the room. No one dared to challenge him, nor did they need to. That very night, under the cloak of darkness, Nathaniel prepared Anna's mare outside the barn. His hands moved with purpose, adjusting the stirrups and draping the saddle with a thick woolen blanket, his mother's cherished heirloom, once tucked away in a chest at her bedside. When Anna emerged to assist with the feed, her gaze caught the added comfort. A questioning arch of her brow met his steady look. "You're riding out tomorrow," he explained gruffly. "Might as well make it a warm journey." Her eyes softened as they traced the blanket's intricate weave. "You didn't have to do this," she murmured. "I know," he replied, his tone clipped, yet kind. Her fingers brushed the wool's edge, a quiet "thank you" escaping her lips. Nathaniel gave a curt nod, turning back to the feed bags as if to shield something deeper, though he never voiced it. When the bitter wind wailed outside and frost seeped under the door, he found himself stoking the fire earlier each evening. Kindling appeared by her room without fanfare. The kettle was filled before she could ask, and her boots were placed near the stove's warmth. Was this mere obligation? No. It had grown into something more, something akin to genuine care. In return, Anna began leaving a lantern glowing by the window on nights he rode back late from town. Their conversations remained sparse, but oh, how their silences spoke volumes, weaving an unspoken bond in the stillness. As the days grew heavier with anticipation, their bond deepened, hovering in that tender space beyond mere acquaintance, yet not quite love. Spring tiptoed in, hesitant and sodden, as if questioning its own arrival. The iron grip of frost began to relent, releasing the earth, while streams swelled with the remnants of winter, washing them away in eager currents. From the cabin roof, snow surrendered in languid, rhythmic drips, as though time itself was thawing. Each day the sun lingered a little longer, spilling warm, honeyed light across the worn kitchen floor, where motes of dust danced in suspended stillness, caught in the golden glow. Anna's movements had slowed, her body now a vessel of burgeoning life, her belly, round and firm, strained beneath her apron, a silent vow awaiting its moment. Yet she persisted in her tasks when Nathaniel allowed, her hand steady as she sliced herbs with precision, kneaded dough with measured breaths, and folded linens into neat, deliberate piles. Every gesture carried the weight of someone accustomed to bearing loads without faltering. But strength did not shield her from pain. One gray afternoon, as she stooped to gather kindling, a sharp pang halted her mid-motion. Her hand pressed into her lower back, her face contorting with unspoken agony. Nathaniel, observing from the porch with a hammer poised in his grip, said nothing. He did not rush to her side. Yet by morning, a low stool appeared beside the wash basin, tilted just right for her to sit while tending to chores. Anna paused, gazing at it, then eased herself down with a soft sigh. No words of gratitude passed her lips. No acknowledgement came from him. Still, the silence between them softened, losing its jagged edge. Days later, as Nathaniel mended the chicken coop out back, her voice pierced the open air, steady yet urgent. "I need help." She did not raise her voice, but the weight of her words carried. Following the raw honesty of their earlier exchange, where vulnerability became a bridge rather than a barrier, Nathaniel laid down his hammer with a heavy thud and turned toward her. There she was, framed by the back steps, one hand gripping the weathered door frame, the other clutching a fragile scrap of paper. He brushed the clinging sawdust from his hands onto his worn trousers, the gesture almost reverent in its simplicity. "All right," she murmured, stepping closer to deliver the list, scrawled in hurried pencil on a torn envelope. Smudges marred the surface, yet the words stood clear. Blankets, boiled string, cotton, scissors. Her finger lingered on the final item, her voice firm. "This one must be pristine, boiled clean. You'll need to ask the midwife for the exact time." Nathaniel's brow arched in silent question. "She's in town," she continued. "Clara Mertz. A stout woman with a braid thick as a rope. Tell her I'm due at the end of May." With a curt nod, he folded the paper into his coat pocket, a silent promise etched into the motion. He rode out before the sun dipped below the horizon. When he returned the following day, his saddlebag swelled with treasures: soft cloth diapers, delicate muslin swaddles, a jar of castor oil, and a worn, thin book titled The Prairie Woman's Guide to Birth and Recovery. He placed the bundle on the table without a word, a quiet offering. That night, Anna drifted through the kitchen and froze. There sat Nathaniel, hunched under the dim lamp, a length of flannel spread before him. Tiny scissors trembled in his rough hands. His tongue caught between his lips in fierce focus as he carved the fabric into neat strips. She lingered in the doorway, unseen, her breath shallow. "You're doing all this. Why?" Her whisper carried no blame, only wonder. He didn't lift his gaze at first. When he did, his eyes were shadowed, heavy with memory. "Because I buried a son once," he said, his voice a hollow echo of pain. As the weight of past regrets lingered from the night before, Nathaniel vowed silently to himself. This time, he would act. He paused, watching her delicate fingers curl around the worn wooden frame. "What happened?" she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Fever," he replied, his tone heavy with sorrow. It claimed him in just 3 days. His mother followed soon after Anna drifted into the room, settling across from him with her hands neatly clasped in her lap. "I'm so sorry," she offered, her words soft but sincere. He gave a faint nod, his gaze fixed on the tattered fabric before him. "So am I," he echoed, the ache in his chest palpable. The next morning, a quiet surprise awaited in the kitchen. Suspended from a sturdy ceiling beam near the window was a small cradle swing crafted from smooth cedar, its curves lovingly shaped and bound with robust cord. Inside, a tender wool lining, stitched with earnest if unsteady hands, cradled the promise of new life. It swayed gently in the dawn's breeze, sunlight casting golden flecks across the soft fabric. Anna approached, her fingertips grazing the cradle's edge. Though she remained silent, her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and a single, trembling breath escaped her lips, a sound that spoke volumes beyond mere words. Could there be a more poignant symbol of hope amidst their grief? Then, without warning, a tempest roared down the mountain, a ferocious barrage of wind, snow, and lightning that battered the cabin with a vengeance Nathaniel hadn't witnessed in years. By nightfall, the shutters clattered like skeletal remains, and the chimney wailed as if in mortal agony. Just past midnight, Anna hunched over near the stove, her breath seizing. A sharp gasp pierced the air. Nathaniel, abandoning the book he'd been feigning interest in, met her gaze and understood instantly. She clutched the table, whispering, "It's time. Now." He half rose, urgency surging. She nodded once, resolute. There was no time to summon Clara, no hope of braving the ridge in this merciless blizzard. With a swift motion, Nathaniel cleared the table, sending salt and flour cascading to the floor, and dashed for blankets. The guidebook tumbled down, and he grabbed it with trembling hands. As the tension from the previous moments lingered in the air, Nathaniel fumbled with the worn book, his fingers quivering as they found the dog-eared page. He had pored over those lines countless times, yet now they seemed like cryptic runes, utterly incomprehensible. Beside him, Anna let out a desperate cry, her face drained of color, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the wooden bedrail as if it were her lifeline to this world. "You're going to be fine," he stammered, his voice a fragile thread of hope. "Do you hear me? Just keep breathing." At first, she held back her screams, but her features contorted with a pain so fierce it seemed it could shatter her very bones. Time melted into an agonizing haze. Perspiration streamed down her forehead, her hair plastered against her skin in wet, tangled locks. Nathaniel did everything in his power-boiling water, steadying her trembling form, swapping out soaked cloths and gently wiping the sweat from her brow. But when the critical moment arrived, her scream pierced the stillness, a raw, primal sound that shook the cabin's walls. "Push!" he bellowed, his voice breaking under the strain. "Push, for heaven's sake! He's almost here!" Her cry roared like a tempest, then gave way to an eerie, deafening silence that buzzed in his ears. The child emerged, tiny, slick with blood and fluid, utterly still. Anna collapsed back, her eyes flickering, her chest rising and falling in ragged gasps. But the baby, oh, the baby did not make a sound. Nathaniel's heart seized. He dropped to his knees, dread surging through him like wildfire. He turned the infant over, patting the delicate back. Nothing. Desperate, he flipped to the page again. "Clear the airways," it instructed. His hand shook uncontrollably as he nearly lost his grip on the fragile form. "Please," he whispered, tears brimming in his eyes. Leaning down, he pressed his mouth to the baby's, drawing out the warm, acrid fluid, spitting it onto the floor with a shudder. Again he tried, and then a twitch. A faint trembling cry broke the silence, so fragile, yet so miraculous. Nathaniel nearly crumbled under the weight of relief. He swaddled the boy in a fresh towel, gently laid him on Anna's heaving chest, and sank to the cold floor, drenched in sweat, trembling as though the earth itself had quaked beneath him. Emerging from the harrowing night, Nathaniel's hands bore the scars of battle with the scalding water pot. Raw and tender, his knees throbbed with a dull ache, his stomach twisted from the bitter residue lingering on his tongue. Yet the boy lived, and Anna, oh sweet Anna, her trembling fingers grazed the child's delicate cheek with a whisper of life. The darkest hours had receded, but rest eluded Nathaniel. He perched near the dwindling stove, the fading embers mirroring the weariness in his bones. His skin, seared by the merciless wind of the earlier tempest, prickled with pain, while his bloodshot eyes stared into nothingness, unfocused and haunted. His throat, hoarse from desperate cries, burned with every breath. The infant stirred briefly, a faint murmur of existence. Anna slumbered, her lips faintly parted, her hand still cradling the boy's tiny fist in a protective embrace. Unable to bear the stillness, Nathaniel rose, braving the biting cold outside, only to return with a weathered piece of pine. Under the dim glow of the lantern he carved with painstaking care, each stroke deliberate. M-I-C-A-H. Tracing the letters, he felt a surge of something new life, perhaps unlike the first time he had etched this name years before. The snowstorm had retreated, leaving behind an eerie, aching quiet. The mountains loomed in solemn silence, under a shimmering silver sky, the cabin nearly swallowed by towering drifts. Within, the fire sputtered softly, bathing the wooden walls in a warm, golden hue. Anna's eyelids fluttered open, pain etched deep in her weary frame, though no longer piercing, just a hollow weight. Her breaths came shallow, yet warmth enveloped her, and something small, so tender, shifted beside her. She turned. There sat Nathaniel in the old rocking chair, swaddled in a tattered quilt, cradling little Micah, whose tiny fists nestled beneath his chin. Rocking gently, unaware of her gaze, Nathaniel sang a broken, gravelly lullaby, raw with fatigue. It was a haunting southern melody, the kind a father hums in the dead of night, believing himself unheard. How could such a rough voice carry so much unspoken love? Anna stood frozen, her breath snagged in her chest as she observed Nathaniel gazing at the tiny child. His expression was a storm of emotions, wonder, fear, and a softness so profound it seemed almost sacred. It carved a hollow space within her, only to flood it with warmth moments later. When his eyes caught hers, he flinched, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his face. "You should be resting," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "I was," she replied in a whisper, barely audible. "But then I heard the music." He averted his gaze, a flush of embarrassment creeping up his neck. "I didn't mean to disturb you." A faint smile touched her lips, her voice raw with emotion. "You didn't. It was beautiful." A heavy silence settled between them, laden with words they dared not speak. Then, piercing the quiet, her voice trembled with honesty. "You're more of a father than he ever could have dreamed of being." Nathaniel's eyes dropped to the baby, a long pause stretching taut before he spoke. "Maybe," he said, his tone heavy with reflection. His eyes shimmered, but he refused to let the tears fall. "Or maybe I just learned too late." Anna's gaze softened, not with pity, but with a quiet, unflinching truth. That afternoon, as she drifted into a light slumber, Nathaniel lingered by the fire, fumbling with something in his lap. It was a tangled ball of rough blue wool, frayed at the edges, a stubborn mess. He grumbled under his breath, frustration evident, yet his hands persisted, weaving and looping with clumsy determination. His fingers, too broad for such delicate work, faltered often, the yarn slipping free, but he pressed on. Hours bled into the day, and finally, he completed it, barely. The result was a hat, misshapen and uneven, stitches wandering aimlessly, yet undeniably a hat. He placed it gently on the table beside the crib before tending to the kettle. When Anna stirred, the comforting aroma of stew filled the air. Blinking slowly, she sat up and reached for little Micah, only to notice the odd, lopsided creation atop his head. She paused, squinted, and then laughter erupted from her, a bright, unexpected burst of joy that seemed to light the room. Nathaniel turned, puzzled. "What's so funny?" he asked, brow furrowed. Holding up the crooked hat, she grinned, her eyes dancing with mirth. "This," she said, her voice still trembling with laughter. How could something so imperfect hold so much heart? Amid soft chuckles, her voice danced with mirth. "This poor hat. It's utterly dreadful, isn't it?" He folded his arms, feigning a stern glare. "Well, I'm no master of needles and yarn, am I?" Her teasing grin widened. "Clearly not. It's as if this hat can't decide which of three styles to be." A hearty laugh escaped him as he scratched the back of his neck, a touch sheepish. "Still, it fits, doesn't it?" Her gaze softened, truly seeing him, and her smile bloomed even brighter. "It does," she murmured, her tone warm. Then in a fleeting, uncalculated moment, she reached for his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. In that simple touch, the heavy cloak of sorrow, storm, and silence seemed to lift, if only by a fraction. There, under the shelter of that clumsy yet endearing hat, with a baby nestled in peaceful slumber and the fire's embers glowing faintly, laughter echoed for the first time. A thaw had begun to creep in, subtle yet undeniable. Outside, snow slid from the cabin's eaves in quiet cascades, pooling in tender splashes below. Mud clung thickly at the base of the porch steps, a messy testament to the melting frost. The once pristine path to the barn now lay exposed, a jagged stretch of brown earth framed by the skeletal remnants of winter's rain. The air still nipped at the skin, but its bite had dulled. The wind, though keen, no longer wailed with ferocity. High in the mountain's embrace, winter's iron hold was loosening, and with it, something deeper, something intangible, was stirring. Anna sat on the porch, cradled in a rocking chair Nathaniel had painstakingly restored for her, her shawl draped protectively around her, and little Micah nestled against her heart. The baby slumbered deeply, one minuscule hand wrapped around her finger, the other resting on the gentle wool of her dress. His breaths came soft and even, a warm reminder of life itself. Nearby, Nathaniel split firewood, sleeves pushed up, his axe moving in a steady, almost reverent rhythm. Since the baby's arrival, his actions had grown gentler, more deliberate, as if attuned to the fragile new world around him. And then, from the eastern trail, a figure emerged, a solitary rider, approaching with purpose through the lingering haze of winter's retreat. Following the quiet resolve of the previous moment, a shadow fell across the yard as a stranger approached with a purpose that seemed to weigh down the very air. His gray coat billowed like a storm cloud in his wake, a brass badge glinting in the sunlight, a sharp, piercing signal of authority. He stood tall, shoulders broad and unyielding, a neatly trimmed mustache framing a face hardened by judgment. His eyes, sharp and unblinking, sized up everything in their path, as if the world itself awaited his verdict. Nathaniel paused mid-swing, the axe still in hand, sensing the shift in the wind. The man dismounted with a grimace, brushing snow from his boots with a disdain that seemed to scorn the very earth beneath him. "Mr. Briggs," he called out, his voice cutting through the stillness. Nathaniel rested the axe against the weathered stump, his posture wary. "And who might you be?" he countered. The stranger flashed his badge with cold precision. "Edgar, Territorial Records and Residency Department. I've received a complaint from a neighbor. Seems your situation here has raised some eyebrows." His gaze slid past Nathaniel to the porch, where Anna stood, her arms tightening protectively around Micah. "There's a woman here. No marriage license on record, and now a child," Edgar remarked, his tone clinical, his eyes appraising Anna with detached scrutiny. "That muddies the waters." Anna stood, the rocking chair creaking its last as she stepped forward, placing herself like a shield between the stranger and their home. "I'm not hiding," she declared, her voice steady as stone. Edgar's response was measured. "Never claimed you were, ma'am, but the law demands clarity. Undocumented residency calls for scrutiny. We're not here to punish, only to prevent complications." Turning to Nathaniel, he pressed, "Is she your legal wife?" Nathaniel's hands tensed at his sides, a quiet fire in his stance. "She's my wife in every way that matters." Edgar tilted his head, unimpressed. "Every way but the one that counts in the eyes of the law. And with a child born outside wedlock, questions arise, accusations, even fraud if the truth isn't plain." Nathaniel stepped closer, his voice low but resolute. "If it's a question you want, file your report. But mark my words, I'll make it legal." Edgar's brow arched in skepticism. How could such a tangled web be unraveled so simply, I wonder? Her presence here is unshakable, and if you intend to force her away, you'll have to face me first. The silence that descended after those words hung heavy, like the fragile hush before an avalanche of snow tumbles from a burdened roof. We stood, hearts pounding in that taut stillness, waiting for the storm to break. At last, Edgar gave a curt nod, his pen scratching briefly across the pages of his ledger before he shut it with a sharp, decisive snap. "You've got 2 weeks to present a witness to the birth, along with some proof of residency," he declared. Nathaniel's response was a stiff, resolute nod. "I'll head to town at first light tomorrow," he assured. Edgar tipped his hat in farewell, a gesture as cold as the wind. "Good day to you both," he said before mounting his horse and riding off, retracing his path into the distance. Once he was gone, the air seemed to settle. The chill less piercing, yet a weight lingered, pressing down on us like an unspoken burden. Anna turned to Nathaniel, her eyes searching his face with quiet intensity. "You didn't need to stand up like that," she whispered, her voice soft but laden with meaning. "Oh, but I did," he replied, his tone steady and unyielding. Her gaze dropped to little Micah, cradled in peaceful slumber, then lifted again. "Are you certain?" she pressed. In answer, Nathaniel reached into the inner pocket of his weathered coat, retrieving a small, time-worn silver ring, its luster faded by years of memory. "It was my mother's," he explained, his voice low. "Her initials were once etched inside, but I smoothed them away." He tilted the ring toward her, revealing a new, uneven engraving Grace found. "It's not flawless," he admitted, "but it's honest." Her breath hitched, a moment of silence stretching between them. Then with a quiet strength, she nestled Micah securely against her chest in the sling and extended her left hand. Nathaniel slipped the ring onto her finger. It didn't gleam, but it fit perfectly, a silent vow holding them together. A year on, the cabin had shed its air of desolation, no longer a mere refuge for the lost. It pulsed with life now, not just in the wisp of smoke curling from the chimney, but in the steady heartbeat of a home. Behind the house, defiant rows of vegetables clawed their way up from the once frozen earth carrots, turnips, beans, and tomatoes, each a testament to resilience. A clothesline swayed gently, bearing the weight of a family's quiet, hard-won victories. How could a place once so hollow now brim with such unspoken hope? As the day unfolded from the quiet strength of the morning, a clothesline stretched taut between two towering pines swayed gently, adorned with faded linens and tiny hand-sewn shirts dancing in the wind. Nearby, wind chimes crafted from weathered spoons and rusted horseshoe nails sang a tender melody with each gust. The air carried a medley of scents: fresh mint, the raw richness of turned earth, sticky pine sap, and the comforting warmth of bread rising in the oven, a fragrance of a world slowly mending its wounds. Inside the humble home, little Micah scrambled across the worn floorboards, his small hands pattering against the wood as he pursued a sunbeam dappled with dust. His innocent babble mingled with bursts of laughter, a sound so pure it seemed to bridge the chasm between past pain and future hope. Could a child's joy truly heal the deepest scars? Anna, meanwhile, knelt in the garden, her hands buried in the earth's embrace. Her apron bore the stains of life-vivid tomato juice, snippets of herbs, and the tender smudges from wiping Micah's runny nose. A streak of soil marked her cheek, and a crimson ribbon, loosely woven into her braid, whispered of a silent gift from Nathaniel, left on her pillow one spring dawn. By the woodpile, Nathaniel paused, wiping the sweat from his neck with the tattered cloth. His gaze lifted just as Anna turned to him, and in that fleeting moment, their eyes locked. Her smile bloomed, and his answered in kind, not hesitant, not guarded, but open and radiant, the smile of a man who no longer fears being truly seen. Oh, what power lies in such unguarded connection! That evening, after a simple supper, shared tales, and a lullaby sung with more heart than harmony, they settled on the porch. Micah, cocooned in a quilt between them, slept with arms outstretched, lost in dreams of warmth. The breeze murmured through the trees, the night holding its breath. Nathaniel's fingers traced the smooth oak of the rocking chair beneath him, a labor of love shaped by his own hands over countless weeks, every curve polished, every joint crafted with unwavering care. He crafted that chair not for display, but for the simple joys of sitting together, for shared moments, for holding on to what mattered most. With a gentle tilt, he angled the chair so Anna could better see the backrest. She leaned closer, her eyes narrowing in curiosity. There, etched into the weathered wood in his rugged yet tender handwriting, were words that pierced her soul. Home isn't a place, it's the way you whisper my name. Her hand reached for his, trembling slightly. He clasped it, his grip both strong and soft, a quiet promise. "You came here to cook," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. A faint laugh escaped her lips. "But somehow you taught me how to breathe again." Anna turned to face him, her gaze catching the soft glow of the porch light, shimmering with unspoken emotion. "And you showed me I was never just a widow," she whispered, her words barely audible, yet heavy with truth. As the sky deepened into twilight, the mountains transformed, first gilded in gold, then softened to lavender, and finally cloaked in blue. Micah stirred in his slumber, a sleepy murmur followed by a tiny giggle. Nathaniel bent down, scooping him up with a tenderness that belied his sturdy frame, the boy nestling into his chest as if it were the safest place on earth. Anna rested her head on Nathaniel's shoulder, her voice a fragile thread in the stillness. "You've saved me in ways you can't imagine." He pressed a kiss to her hair, whispering, "I know." Together, the three of them swayed gently, rocking in rhythm, as the night wrapped them in its comforting embrace. Some stories don't conclude with dramatic clashes or triumphant fanfare. Instead, they resolve in the quiet redemption found in the warmth of those who choose to remain. Nathaniel never sought grace, nor did Anna anticipate peace. Yet, in the heart of a Colorado winter, beneath a roof forged more from unspoken understanding than timber, they discovered both. Have you ever felt healing arrive not with a shout, but in the quiet rustle of flannel and stillness? Can love truly slip in through the back door, trailing muddy boots and a child's sleepy cries, and still mend a broken heart? A love that blossoms in the harshest of terrains, defying all odds. What wonders await us next on this untamed frontier? Stay tuned. Thank you, dear viewers, for joining us on this heartfelt journey. Please share your thoughts, like, share, and subscribe for more.